Working. How about that? If you're joining us online, I encourage you to, if you're in the area, to consider joining us here in person. Something about community. We are created for it. We are not meant to be alone. We are meant to have community with others. So I encourage you to join us in person. As well as during the Job series, you'll notice we're not reading the scripture in the message time because we're doing it beforehand to kind of divide that up a little bit. We are continuing on in our Job series, Suffering, a study of suffering. As you've probably already guessed, we're going to be looking at Job chapters 12, 13, and 14 this morning. So that being said, I'm going to do my best to get us out of here before 2 o'clock this afternoon. Okay, that's my goal. I am going to try and go through it as quick as possible. Because of that, I want to hit some highlights. But there is a lot of really, really good stuff in these chapters. So I recommend going back and looking over it on your own. And if we ever go back through Job again in the future, we'll look at it, at different aspects of it. But today we're going to highlight a few things that I really want us to think about and walk through. One thing that I love about my family is that I have kids that are very active. They're involved in a lot of different things. And when you multiply that by 3, it gets a little crazy at times. So our kids are extremely active, and especially one of them is very, very active in different things. So some of the stuff that they do are marching band, concert band, jazz band. We have soccer, wrestling, softball, key club, mock trial, debate, quiz bowl, speech, and jobs as well for a couple of them. And then there's 2 of them that are involved in what we call tech or Teens Encountering Christ. The other one's not because he's not old enough yet. You have to be at least going into high school. And so with all these different things going on, and I'm sure there are some things that I didn't name that I forgot because there's a lot, as you noticed, that our kids are doing. Life can get a little crazy, especially then you take in and add in the fact that Dawn has a practice and that I have multiple jobs that I work, and you put all those things together, and things can get to feeling very chaotic throughout the week. And it feels like we're just doing whatever we can to hang on to what's going on in the moment. And life gets crazy. Now, I say all that, but remember, I also really love the fact that my kids are in these things and experiencing various things and learning new stuff. But it does get crazy. And all of us in this room can understand this idea that at times, life feels like chaos. Whether you have kids, had kids, wanting to have kids, or whether you're enjoying life as just a good old adult and you don't have to deal with children, and you're enjoying that aspect, maybe your kids are now adults, and you've moved on from that side, you've moved to a new phase, and now you've got grandkids or whatnot. Life can still feel chaotic at times, trying to just keep up with everything that's going on. And especially at the pace that culture changes, it can feel like we're always behind the 8 ball, always trying to catch up to something new that's going on, catch up to what's happening around us, understand some new term that's being used. And it just feels like everything is spinning out of control. Sometimes it's painful. Sometimes we're in suffering. Sometimes things are just getting out of hand just in our normal life. One thing that I want to encourage you is this. When life feels like chaos, God is still in control. We walk around life and it feels like there is nothing going on that is making sense, that everything's chaotic, it's just random, it's whatever, and we can't figure out that there's any kind of plan going on. Those are the moments that we have to remind ourselves that while we only see the picture in part, that there is a grand scheme, there is a plan, there is action happening that we are not aware of. And that through all of it, God is still in control. When life is nothing but pain, God is still there. He is still in control. And as we we make our way into chapter 13, not chapter 13, sorry, skipping a chapter. Chapter 12, we are reintroduced to Job again, right? So we have what's going on in Job is you have what's called a cycle of speeches. And there's a few of those that take place. We are nearing the end of the first cycle of speeches. And what that is Job's friends came and spoke at him, yelled at him basically, and then Job gave a response, and then another friend did the same thing, and then Job gave a response. The final third friend spoke, and now we're at Job's response to that friend. And so we're ending this cycle of speeches. And Job kicks off chapter 12 with a lot of sarcasm. He's looking at his friends, and he basically just goes, yeah, you guys, you know everything, obviously. You apparently just have it all figured out. But guess what? I know all the stuff that you're telling me to. I know all of the things that you have tried to teach me. And what I have realized is that your words are completely useless. So he looks at his friends and he tells them, you are completely useless. I wish you would just keep your mouth shut. He doesn't beat around the bush. He gets straight to it. This is what's going on. I wish you guys would just be quiet. And then in verses 5 and 6, we kind of begin to see some things of what's going on with Job. So let's look back at those really briefly, at what's happening there. And this is what Job says. The one who is at ease holds calamity in contempt, and thinks it is prepared for those whose feet are slipping. The tents of robbers are safe, and those who trouble God are secure. God holds them in his hands. So remember that the overall thought process of Job's friends has been that if you are a good person and you do all the good things that God tells you to do and you do them all the right way, then God will give you good things. If you choose to reject God's teachings and you choose to live a sinful life, then you will receive bad things. You will have consequences, negative consequences for your actions. And as we've walked through the book, we've realized that that's not necessarily the truth. Because a lot of times, God gives grace when we don't deserve it, which is what grace is. He shows us kindness. He offers forgiveness when we have not done anything to earn it. But this is the overwhelming thought process of all of Job's friends. It's the main thing that they've yelled at him. They've been looking at him going, clearly you are caught up in a life of sin because you're suffering right now. If you had repented of all your sin, you wouldn't be suffering. Your kids wouldn't have died. You wouldn't have lost all of your livestock. You wouldn't have lost all of your wealth. Your health wouldn't have disappeared. If only you would admit that you are a sinful man and that you haven't offered sacrifices for your sins. And all the while, Job's going like, I've done everything God has called me to do. When I sin, even when my kids have sinned, I have offered sacrifices to make sure that we pay for our sin, that we take care of those things, that we meet the requirements God has set for us. Job has done everything he could. He's like, and I can't figure out what's going on. But his friends keep telling him over and over again, it's because you're a terrible person. If your kids weren't terrible people, they wouldn't have died. If you weren't a terrible person, they would have lived, and your health wouldn't be crap right now. That's what they keep telling him over and over again. And in these two verses, in verses 5 and 6, Job undoes that thought process. He looks at them and goes, well, what about the thief that gets away with it? The robber that comes and steals and goes home unharmed. They clearly committed a sin. They wronged somebody else. They took something that was not theirs. Clearly, that is not something God condones. Then why are they allowed to live in peace? Why are they allowed to profit from that sin? If the logic of his friends was true, why are these people kept safe? Verse 5, he looks at them and goes, the one whose life is perfect, it's easy for you to say that. He's looking at his friends whose life seems to be okay at this moment from what we can tell. He's looking at them and going, yeah, your life is perfect, so it's really easy for you to look at me and tell me how terrible I am. It's really easy from your state of comfort to look at me in my pain and say that you're better than me. He's looking at his friends and he's going, you think you're better, but you're not. You are not better than I am. Even though they have clearly taken that posture, that's how they have treated him, that they know more than he does, that they are better than him. And because of that, he should listen to what they have to say. Because clearly, they're not sinful men because they aren't suffering right now. And Job looks at them and goes, what about the robber? He's not suffering either, but clearly he's a sinful man. But he's not standing here in front of me telling me how terrible I am. He looks at his friends and he calls them deceivers, that their words are lies like plaster to cover up the truth, to make themselves feel better, to raise themselves above Job and then look down on him for his pain. And he looks at them and he says, you are wrong. And then the end of verse 6 gives us something to remember. God holds them in his hands. Job is still talking about the robber. He's still talking about the one who troubles God. Job is reminding his friends that it does not matter where we are, how broken we are, how sinful we are, how much we choose to live in that life of sin, God is still the one holding us. God is the one that is still in control. And then we get to verses 13. We're going to read 13, and then we're going to skip a little bit. We're going to look at 16, okay? And this is what Job says to his friends there. Wisdom and strength belong to God. Counsel and understanding are his. Verse 16, true wisdom and power belong to him. The deceived and the deceiver are his. He holds sway over both. The good person and the one that we would describe as a bad person. I got a quick note on that. We would all actually fit into the bad person category. None of us, compared to God, would be considered good because we are all broken and sinful. And I say we because I am too. I know that may be a shock to some of you that I am not perfect, but I'm not. Caleb's surprised. So, but that is the reality of it. That God is in control of all of it. And Job is acknowledging that in his speech to his friends. He's reminding them that he is the one that reigns, that God is the one in control. Nothing happens without God's approval. Just like we saw at the beginning of the book of Job in chapters 1 and 2, we see that for all the suffering that Satan has brought on to Job, he had to go to God and get permission for it. And that means that ultimately God was still in control of it. And God allowed it to take place to test Job's faith, to prove to Satan that Job truly loved God more than anything else. The other thing about this idea here, this idea of God's sovereignty is the big word that we could use for that. And sovereignty is just this idea of total control over something, right? It's a quick, very short definition of the idea of sovereignty, total control over something. And sorry, that's not on the slides because I wasn't thinking about saying that until right now. So there you go. Free one for you. But this idea of God's sovereignty is that he is over everything that happens. And as Job goes through this line of discussion with his friends, we notice that he goes through everything that happens and that can happen. And then we get into chapter 13, and he begins to really point out some of these specific things. Does he water, God waters what he wills and holds back what he desires. So life exists because God allows it to. Plants receive the water they need because God chooses to deliver it. Plants wither and die because God chooses to withhold the rain. God has a sway over all of mankind at every single level. God is in control of all things that take place. And Job addresses this with these questions that he's asking about how God causes nations to expand, but then undoes them. That God gives strength to these kings and then removes that strength as he desires. And here's the thing about this idea of God's sovereignty. We like to say we believe in the sovereignty of God, the rule, the control of God, as long as it doesn't interfere with what we want. As long as it doesn't interfere with what we think or what we believe or what we feel is correct. And then we want to dial back this idea of God being in control. So this idea of God being in control, I've got a little, I'm going to burst your political bubble for a moment. Okay? Does not matter what side of the aisle you choose to sit on, or even if you choose to sit in the middle of the aisle. The person that is in charge, the person that is elected, or the person that is removed, that happens because God deems it so. God places into power who he desires, and he removes who he desires from power. It does not matter what side of the aisle you fall on. Ultimately, the one that's there is there because God chose them to be there. Because he is in control. If he is truly sovereign, that means he is in control of who our leaders are as well. And that's the thing that Job is talking about. He is saying just that idea. That God places into power who he wishes and removes who he wishes, so that his will is accomplished. You see, submitting to the supremacy of God means acknowledging that he is working even when life is filled with pain. Job, no matter what he's gone through, all the pain, all the strife, all the struggle that he has experienced, is looking at his friends and saying, even though all this has happened, God is still in control. When life feels like chaos, God is still in control. God is still in control. Even when we think life is spinning out of it, there's a master plan taking place in the background that we don't always see. Verse 5 of chapter 13, Job reiterates what he would like his friends to do. If only you would shut up and let that be your wisdom. He looks at his friends and he's basically saying, you are not as wise as you think. Please keep your mouth shut. And the reality of this is sometimes there is wisdom in keeping our mouth closed. Sometimes it is wise for us to just be quiet. Kind of reminds me of the adage of it's better to be thought a fool than open your mouth and remove all doubt, right? That's kind of that idea. Sometimes it's better just to be quiet and not say something that the person's going to look at you and go, and just shut up. Just stop it. Because what you have to say may not actually be beneficial. And sometimes what's more beneficial is just to sit in silence with them. And that's what he's telling his friends. I need you to be quiet. You're done, is this idea. And then he gets into verses 14 and 19. Let's look back at those again. I will put myself at risk and take my life in my own hands. Even if he kills me, I will hope in him. I will still defend my ways before him. Yes, this will result in my deliverance, for no godless person can appear before him. Pay close attention to my words. Let my declaration ring in your ears. Now then, I have prepared my case. I know that I am right. Can anyone indict me? If so, I will be silent and die. So Job, at this point, is still talking to his friends, but he is in the process of turning to God to begin a discussion with God. Okay? And he's setting up this courtroom scene is kind of the idea. And Job is going to go before God, who is judge, and lay out his case. And he's looking at his friends and say, I need you to be quiet because this is what's about to happen. I am willing to go before God and risk my life. Because if I am sinful and I appear before the Almighty in his perfect holiness, I will die. And so he looks at the end of 18, and he looks at his friends and goes, if I'm wrong, tell me I am wrong. I will admit it, and then I will die. None of his friends can say anything. And Job knows this because Job knows that he has done everything God has asked. And he's done it to the best of his ability. But what this shows us, I love this passage because it shows us something very important about God. Because we like to sanitize God. We want to weaken him and make him feel safe and comfy. And there are times where that is true, where we can be comfortable in front of God. But we often forget that, as my wife likes to remind me, two things can be true at the same time. We often forget that just because God can comfort us and we are safe in his arms, we often forget that just because of that does not mean that he is a safe God. We do not serve a safe God. We serve a righteous and holy God. And because he is righteous and holy and we are very much sinful, he is not safe for us. We are all broken. We have all sinned, and sin cannot survive in the presence of a perfect, holy, righteous God. It must be destroyed. And us just walking into his pure presence, we would die, which is what Job is talking about. He's saying, I am willing to go before God because I know I am innocent. And I also understand that if I somehow am not, I am willing to accept the consequences. I'm willing to take my punishment because I will still trust God. He is not safe, but I know he is so good. There's a book, it's a fairly famous book, it's been made into a movie. A guy named C.S. Lewis wrote this book called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It's part of a series of books called The Chronicles of Narnia. Maybe you're familiar with it, maybe you're not. That's okay, I'll give you a quick understanding. Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in particular, is probably the more famous one of the series, but it is direct allegory about our relationship with God. And it's a fanciful world. There's talking animals, there's witches, there's a lion that becomes kind of one of the main characters. You also have the Pevensey family that are the three siblings that become kings and queen in this magical land called Narnia. And the way you access this land is through a wardrobe, hence the name, the wardrobe. The witch represents Satan. The lion represents God. The lion's name is Aslan. And so the Pevensey kids are showing up in this magical land. They don't know how they've gotten there. They don't know where they are. But somehow or another, they are a key to undoing the witch's spell on this land. It has plunged the land into an eternal winter, and it is part of something to do with them. They don't know why or what or how. They are to help undo this. And they go to meet this guy named Aslan. And they're being introduced by a character named Mr. Beaver. Okay? So I wanted to read just the excerpt where they're talking about Aslan. Mr. Beaver is talking to Lucy, one of the main characters, and is kind of telling her very briefly about Aslan. And this is what the exchange is. Aslan is a lion, the great lion. Oh, said Susan, I'd thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting a lion, which I would too. Safe, said Mr. Beaver. Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you. You see, Aslan is a direct representation of God. And what Mr. Beaver is reminding us is that he is far from safe, because he's still a wild lion. We don't know what he's doing, because he doesn't have to reveal his plans to us, because he is king. And because of that, that makes him a bit dangerous, because we never know what he's going to do next until it happens. But the thing we need to remember is that in that unknowing, in that uncertainty, we need to remember that he is still good. And that while we may not know what he's doing, we may not understand his plan, we should remember that it is for our good. It doesn't always feel that way, because it hurts most of the time. It's quite painful. But one thing we realize, that as we grow out of those moments of pain and suffering, we are able to look back and see that it is good. That the struggle helped us to grow. It helped us to mature. It helped us to move closer to God. God is perfect in his justice and holiness, and that makes him dangerous to a sinful people. Because as I said earlier, when we are sinful, we cannot stand in the presence of perfect justice and righteousness and holiness. Because justice deems that our sin be paid for, and the only way to pay for sin is with death. And when we stand before a holy God, he must deliver his justice. And the justice that we deserve, that we have earned, is death. However, he is also perfect in his compassion, love, and grace. And that makes a way for a sinful people to be forgiven. This is the best part. This is the best part. That while he is perfect and his justice must be satisfied, and our sin demands a death, his love, grace, and compassion also must be satisfied. And because of that, he provides a way for forgiveness to take place, for freedom to be found from sin. And so he provided Jesus Christ. And then in chapter 14, Job kind of moves to a more macabre type thing. Kind of moves to morbid ideas and begins discussing things that we don't like to admit to sometimes. He begins talking about the fact that at some point in time we will all die, that our loved ones will pass away, that we will also do so one day as well. And he admits to the fact that our days are short. In the view of eternity, our days on this earth are short and predetermined by God. That's what Job is talking about in chapter 14. When you look at eternity in the grand scheme of things, just a few years, 80, if we live to be 80, in the grand scheme of eternity, 80 is just a blip on the radar, if that. And it's all been predetermined. God already knows the number of our days that we have to live. It'd be nice if he'd share them with us sometimes, but he doesn't. But it's all been determined. Our days are short. And for those of us in the room that are Christians, this should be something that we talk about, that we think about. Not obsess over, that's different. But it should be something that is in the back of our mind, because what that means is we never know when our time here is done. And we've been given a mission while we are here to share the grace of Christ with everybody that we can, especially with those that are closest to us. We are to tell them about Jesus and what he has done. The fact that he has paid for our sin, that he has set us free. And if we are Christians, we must live like today is it. When life feels like chaos, God is still in control. When it feels like the world is coming to an end, and you hear that all the time, the world's ending soon, it's going to end on this day. Nobody knows when it's coming to an end. However, we should act like it's tomorrow. For those of us that are Christians, we should act like the world is ending tomorrow. Or, if you really need to make it more urgent, this afternoon. And you've only got a few moments. You've only got a little bit of time to share the love of Jesus with the people around you. Take advantage of that opportunity. Show them Jesus. Be compassionate, be loving, be kind, but also speak truth. We must speak truth in love. Actions without words are dead, and words without action are useless. It must be both. We must love in action and speak truth through love. Verses 15 and 17 of chapter 14 are also some of my favorite parts. These chapters are full of really good stuff. And this is also another really awesome part. You would call, and I would answer you. You would long for the work of your hands. For then you would count my steps, but would not take note of my sin. My rebellion would be sealed up in a bag, and you would cover over my iniquity. Iniquity is a word we don't use very often, but what it means is my sin, my wrongdoing, my misdeeds. Take whichever word you want to plug in there. They all mean the same thing. I love these 3 verses here, because there are times in the Old Testament where the New Testament comes into focus. So when I was younger in my faith, I didn't enjoy reading the Old Testament. I didn't like it. I liked the New Testament because I had a hard time seeing and understanding how the old led to the new. And you can't have the new without the old. And I couldn't understand. They tell the same story. They both tell the story of Jesus. One tells the story that Jesus is on his way, and the New Testament tells the story of Jesus is here. And I had a hard time understanding that. The more I've grown in my faith, the more I've forced myself to read the Old Testament, the more of Jesus I see in it. The more of him is revealed. And these 2 verses show him. They reveal him. And the fact that it's not on us to earn our forgiveness, but he has given it freely. That when we follow him, our sin, our rebellion is sealed in a bag and tossed on the fire. It is no more because it has been forgiven. When our hearts are filled with agony, we are not alone. When life seems to be nothing but pain, God is still in control. When sorrow is overwhelming, God is there. And this passage from the Old Testament where Jesus shines through shows that we are not alone, we are not on our own, that He is there, that He, from the very beginning, has been guiding things, that He has always had a plan to redeem His people, to call us out of our sin and to Himself, to raise us out of the muck so that we could be made clean. When life feels like chaos, God is still in control. God is still in control. Even when it feels like He's not, I promise He is, because He is always working, He is always moving, even when we cannot see it. So here's my question for you, because we have this illusion of control. We think that we are the ones in control of everything happening around us. But that's really not the case. We are allowed to do things. We are allowed to make decisions, but ultimately the outcomes are up to God, which means ultimately He is in control. That's what sovereignty means, that He is complete, utter control. So here's my question to you. Have you given up the illusion of control? This fits for Christians and non-Christians. Maybe you're not a follower of Christ yet. Maybe you're just looking into this Jesus thing. And you don't like this question. I get that. It's tough to give up the idea of control, to think that something outside of ourselves might be in control of where things are going. But the more control you give to God, the more you give up that illusion that you have a say in the way things are going to go, the freer your heart becomes, the lighter it feels. I'm going to pray for us, and then our elder, Rich, is going to come up, and we're going to take communion for those of you that would like to join us in that. We invite you to join us. So I'll pray, and then Rich, I'll turn it over to you. God, thank you so much that you are still in control, even when life feels like it is running crazy, that everything's falling apart, that in reality you are still there. You are still guiding it, and you are drawing us to yourself. You are calling us out from where we are to where you want us to be. Give us strength to turn to you, Lord. In your name we pray. Amen.